I am very grateful, very honored, and very happy to be with all of you today. Thank you, Barbara and Kula Pradeep and Dinabandhu and Ganasham Prabhus and everyone else who's involved in this in spirit outreach program. The Bhaktivedanta Hospital, it kind of grew, you may say, organically or holistically according to time, place, and circumstance. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was a military person, and he was told to do his duty in such a way that he was obviously performing his duty for the society, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The Bhagavad Gita is a holistic scripture. And as we were spreading bhakti or Krishna consciousness, a group of medical students became very serious. And some of them actually wanted to be monks. They wanted to join the ashram. And understanding this spirit that whatever God gives us, we can use in a spirit of compassion. Paradukkha dukhi, the nature of a person who is God conscious, is we feel the sufferings of others, and we are happy when we see others becoming happy. So we asked them to continue and graduate, and then when they graduated, we asked them to get their graduate degrees, and then they did that, and then their specialist degrees, and soon we had all these young girls and young men, boys, who were, they grew into full doctors, and they all got married, some to each other, some to people, that they had known, and had individual practices. And this idea came, why don't we just start a hospital where doctors and nurses and administrators and cooks and practically every type of field you could imagine are involved in a hospital, and we could all be together as a community to uplift the body, the mind, and the soul. And the Bhaktivedanta Hospital, we have most of the departments of allopathy. We do open heart surgeries, and every day there's so many little babies being born, and cancer surgeries, and so many things like that. And we also wanted to establish a holistic principle, because sometimes medicine could be as sectarian as religion. So we have a branch of Ayurveda, a branch of homeopathy, a branch of naturopathy, and a branch of yoga therapy, acupuncture, acupressure, along with all the main branches of allopathy. And all of these people work, they all serve together, because each one of these branches of medicine, has a particular perspective of how to cure people. But the foundation that all of these different branches of medicine coming together is built upon is what we call spiritual care, where the patients, as well as the relatives of the patients, are given a spiritual wisdom, probably over a third of the patients are Muslims or Christians or Sikhs or Jains or Parsis or Jews or atheists or agnostics. There's all kinds of people that come there because it's a hospital. And according to a person's desire for spiritual care, we try to provide that. Universal spiritual care. If a person wants a priest or a mullah, an Islamic spiritual leader to come, we encourage that. And we have a team of devotees who go from one bed to another, and anybody who's open to it, they give spiritual care. They give an understanding of the integrated connection between the body and the mind and the Atma, or the soul. This is such a basic principle of spirituality, that we're not this physical body, we're the eternal soul within this body. And in the Bible it is said, what profiteth a person if they gain the whole world, if they lose their soul? And their eternal soul. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells, Najayate mriyate va kadachat, that the nature of the living force within the body that animates this body is, it is without birth and without death. Dehinosmin yata dehi komaram yovaram chara, tata dehantara praptir dhirastatra namuyate. That just as each and every one of us, we have witnessed life as a little infant child, and then a baby, and then a child growing up, and then a teenager, and some of us are now middle-aged or old-aged, but it's the same person that's seeing all of life through all the changes of the body. And the Gita explains that death is another change, where the soul changes into another form according to our desires and our activities in this life, according to what we value. So, this spiritual care gives people such emotional peace and confidence, and sometimes in a hospital, people just cannot be cured. Sometimes in emergencies, people come and there's nothing you could really do. And at that time we have like a hospice, and we also have a team of people in the spiritual care department that actually help people in the process of dying. And sometimes people from other religions ask us to do it according to our religion, simply because they felt so much love and care for their relative who's dying. And in this way, life itself and death are inseparable. And the more we understand the nature of death, the more we can have a deeply fulfilling and meaningful life, and a life without paranoia or fear. And at the same time, the more we live in this spirit, the more death is actually a beautiful doorway that's opened for us. So this spiritual care is for people from all religions and people from no religions. It's amazing when people are really suffering on a hospital bed, how open and receptive they are, because they're really thinking about things. They're not so distracted. And it has been, in many ways, quite transformative. The doctors, the nurses, and all the other hospital staff, they try to treat the patients as emotionally kind and generous and compassionate as possible. They do their medical services as professional as possible, but at the same time, they're there to really treat the body, the mind, and the soul, to uplift the soul. And because of this, many government hospitals and private hospitals have seen this and how it has transformed people's lives when they come out, or or the relatives of a person that may pass away. They see how it has actually benefited their life so much, we can say healed their souls, that these other hospitals are asking Bhaktivedanta Hospital to actually give training in spiritual care to their staff. And the Barsana Eye Camp, it's a special project because the Brijabasis, the residents of Vrindavan, Barsana is a village of Vrindavan, the place of Sri Radharani. They are just wonderful, sweet village people who have oftentimes very, very little income. Many are in poverty that people in America have never seen. And the greatest problem with eye health is blindness caused by untreated cataracts. This is throughout India, but especially in that area. So these are just wonderful people, and we wanted to help them in whatever way we can, because after all, we have doctors, and somehow or other, quite a few of them were ophthalmologists. So we started very small. Bhaktivedanta Hospital started with just a couple little rooms in a rented little store, and it gradually became about I think, 300-bed hospital, considering its branches. And the eye camp started with just a few Brijabasis getting surgeries, and now they treat several thousand, but about 1,000 surgeries, full surgeries every year during the camp, and many thousands they treat. And there's a kirtan going throughout, because that's what people love the most. And they're given nice prasad, and it's just such a joy. I often cite one example where there was a doctor in Bombay, an ophthalmologist, who was quite famous and quite wealthy, in fact, very wealthy. And somehow or other, he felt so materialistic, he wanted to do something for charity. So he went to the Barsana Eye Camp because everybody there is a volunteer. And he joined the devotees. And it was very difficult for him because he lives in a beautiful home. And now he's staying in a very primitive little Vrindavan Barsana room. And a lot of the treatments are in tents, and the government gives us some schools to do our operating. He did a surgery for this very old lady. She was probably in her 90s. She looked like she was in her hundreds. And after he did the surgery, a couple days later, he went to her bed and took the patch off of her eye. And she was completely in rags. She just lived in total poverty situation in this village. And she was, very thin and just very beat up from a hard life, and just an old lady. And what they do is they have a picture of Krishna that they put in front of them, so the first thing they could see is Krishna, because the Brijabasis love Krishna, and Radharani especially. So they She opened her eye, and it's the first time she could see clearly in years. And she was uneducated, and she expressed her gratitude by slapping this distinguished aristocratic doctor on the top of the head. She just kept slapping him and saying, "May Radharani bless you, may Radharani bless you. Now I can see, may Radharani bless you." And he was standing there crying. And he said it was the deepest spiritual experience he ever had in his life. He said it was more satisfying than all the money he had ever made to be blessed by this old lady who had nothing. And because he actually understood what a difference he made in her life. And even though the eye camp it's in the winter. It's very cold. Sometimes it's raining, and sometimes it's muddy, and there's no heat. And he comes every year because it's become the most meaningful part of his life. So it's a harmonizing of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And this, we believe, is holistic health. And it's this type of holistic health that brings people deep happiness. I forgot your question, but I hope that answers it.
Maharaj, that the question was, how do you envision spirituality integrating into these medical programs? And you answered it perfectly. Actually, I had a follow-up question about, some people who might consider this altruistic or worldly, but you answered the question in full, even answering that question before I could ask it. The influence of that kind of spiritual care work that's happening is transformative, and it makes a big impact, not just on the patient, but the doctors and the staff as well. It's transforming people, seeing Krishna, hearing Krishna's name, and giving them a value in spiritual life. So I thank you for that complete and full answer. And that was an inspiring answer, and I thank you. And I turn it over to, I think Barbara has the following question.
Thank you, Maharaj, for being here and supporting this beautiful program. You touched upon this, but I would like a little advice, and we talked about this last night, that the word death and dying, especially in the American culture, people are so uncomfortable with, and our relationship with it has become unnatural. And there really is no dying, because we're alive until the last breath, and there's so many opportunities for the soul to express. How can we develop a healthier relationship to what we have labeled as death? Is it readings? Is it certain scripture where we can start to walk hand in hand with life and death and know that they're the same, and not to even categorize people that are dying as dying people because they're alive? What more can we do to have a healthier relationship with transitioning?
I'm just remembering as you're speaking, my beloved Guru Srila Prabhupada. He would often cite, when he visited Moscow in Russia, practically the only person he was allowed to see at that time during the communist regime was a Professor Katowski, who was one of the most respected scholars in that area. And when Srila Prabhupada tried to discuss something spiritual, Professor Katowski said, "Swamiji, when there's death, there's nothing left. After death, nothing else exists." And Srila Prabhupada would cite later on that what to speak of great scholars of scriptures, but also, you know, simple field workers who have no education in India, they understand that the living force, the Atma, the soul within them, is eternal. And in that sense, there's no such thing as death. Death is a transition. And Srila Prabhupada explained that real knowledge really is to understand what life is. And unless we understand life in the context of death, we have a very, very incomplete conception of life, because death is inevitable. And it can happen at any moment. To have a really fulfilling life is to have confidence in a higher power that's beyond the power of just our own ability to sustain ourselves. And education is important. That we should not discuss death as a negative thing. We should discuss death as an inseparable aspect of life. And naturally, we want to sustain this body as long as we can. That's natural, and that's something we should do. And naturally, when somebody who we have affection for dies, it's a crisis for the heart, because that medium by which we could communicate with the person is no longer there. When death comes for a loved one, if that person's a good person, what to speak if that person is close to God, then we can celebrate their life. We can celebrate their life, and we can know for sure that, you know, they're being transported by God's grace to a higher realm of consciousness, to a higher life. And that's something that we can be certain of. It's what all the saints have told us. It's what all the scriptures have told us. And it's true. But at the same time, the body, which was a medium by which we could communicate in a certain intimate way with that person, is no longer there. And naturally, there's separation. And in this way, the tears of our separation can celebrate the goodness of their life. And because the soul is eternal, and because God is within the heart of every living being, Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hrideshya Arjuna Tishtati. Krishna tells in Gita that the Lord is within the heart of every living being. And, you know, through the Lord within our heart, you know, we can communicate with all of our loved ones wherever they may be, you know, through our prayers, through our remembrance, through our chanting. And in this way, the relationship does not end. It just changes.
So beautiful, Radhanath Swamiji. It's very comforting to hear those words. Thank you.
Maharaj, wanted to just to follow up on that beautiful answer. There, like you just mentioned, that to be in relationship with someone is something that's ongoing, and at the time of death or end of life, it just changes phase. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, ideally spiritual care is something that can extend through all of the different phases of our lives. And it's something that doesn't only come, in times of crisis or times of difficulty. So I wanted to ask you, your perspectives about how we can provide spiritual care for those who we love and care for throughout the course of life, under any circumstance, as an ongoing offering.
I'm just remembering long ago, in times of the past, we used to fly in airplanes, and the announcements that take place at the beginning of a flight, many people don't listen to them because they say the same thing every time. But I listen sometimes. And they say that if the oxygen gets low, the oxygen masks fall from the ceiling. And if you're a mother, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before your child. Because unless we're fit, we can't really help another. So spiritual care in life and in all aspects of life is meaningful, and we have the power to actually help people when we have something to give them. And in my own life, sometimes I think that I'm just so far from God. What's the hope for me? But if I could bring others closer to God, then that's something beautiful. And it's in giving that we receive. It's in giving, it's when we humble ourselves to be the servant of another and try to give them by our example, to give another person by our example, by our care. That's when we really can experience a connection with God, with Krishna. In giving we receive, and this is very much the message that Srila Prabhupada taught us, and that Lord Chaitanya taught us, that in giving and sharing bhakti or devotion with others sincerely, then that's where we really feel the presence of God in our own life. Because Krishna's pleased, God is pleased when we dedicate ourselves to be instruments of his compassion. And for that reason, it's important that we are good examples. The more, if you don't have food, you can't feed hungry people. If you don't have spiritual knowledge, if you don't have spiritual inspiration, if you don't have a connection to God's compassion in our own hearts, there's very little we can do to help spiritually uplift others. So our spiritual practice, our sadhana, our character, sadachar, and our service, our seva, it's very important that we develop these things to become spiritually strong so that we actually have the capacity to really uplift others.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Thank you.
And I see in our community in Mumbai and communities all over the world actually that the idea of community is everyone has their place. Just like the body has various organs that have different shapes and different functions and different colors, but every organ is serving each other. every organ is serving the whole body. It's not that one organ is thinking it's all about me, because unless the whole body is functioning properly, no part of the body could be happy. So in the same way, there's people who are educators, people in industry and business, people in politics, people who are mothers, people who are fathers, people who are students. There are devotees who are monks, engineers, farmers, whatever it may be. If we all have a sense of sincere responsibility that we need to try to cultivate our own spirituality so that we have something to share with others, then community becomes actually very beautiful.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you. As a principle of community building, this just feels like such an important principle to hold on to, because everyone we're with at all times, we want to offer to them, but at the same time, like you said, we have to put on the oxygen mask first. So Kula, I believe, has a follow-up.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you. Another great answer and emphasis on community. Thank you. One thing, me and Dina, we did a bit of an exercise, and we wanted to see some examples of spiritual care in our literature, in our scripture. And we thought of Arjuna and Krishna. We thought of Uddhava and Krishna in the Bhagavatam, Bhima on the bed of arrows. But one in particular seemed to be like a great example of spiritual care, and that's the kind of the subject matter of the poster and the flyer and the inspiration was the pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the passing of Haridasa Thakur. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and maybe highlight some of the aspects of this kind of transcendent spiritual care. If you could, if you don't mind.
That's a wonderful subject. Haridasa Thakur, he was truly paradukkha dukhi. He was an example of a person who lived with the deepest compassion. At one time, he was born in India at the time, 500 years ago, in a family that was considered an outcast family by the corrupted caste system. And therefore, he was very much rejected. He was persecuted throughout his life. And yet, he was always giving and always forgiving. The word forgiving, it's actually a very special word, where our life is forgiving, where it's not about me, it's about forgiving. And when we're really in that mood and we actually have the power to forgive. So, at one time, he was arrested. And because he was arrested by the king of another religion who was in power at the time, and said, if you don't stop preaching this Hindu doctrine, this Krishna Bhakti, then we're going to kill you. If you stop giving it to others and you just mind your own business and do it yourself, we'll leave you alone. And Haridas said that even if you chop my body into 1,000,000 pieces, every one of those pieces will be telling others about the glories of God. And Haridas laughed. He said, just see the power of Maya or illusion. You're thinking that you're God of your religion and another person's God of another religion, and you're thinking that religion is competitive. He said there is one supreme truth who's the father and the mother of all living beings, who has many names, who has revealed himself in many times, in many places, in many scriptures. But it's that same supreme person who gives shelter to everyone, who has so mercifully, so kindly expanded himself to appear in so many ways. And the king and the religious heads of the time, they didn't like to hear that. So they said, then you will be beaten 22 marketplaces till you die. So they beat him in 22 marketplaces, and all the time he was chanting the holy names of Krishna, because that's, at one point he told the king, actually, that there's one God and there's one truth, which is that we're all part of that one God. We're all children of that one God, and the deepest potential within everyone is to love God. And when that love of God is awakened within our heart, then we naturally become compassionate to all beings. We don't see a distinction between various races or sexes or social situations or religions or no religions. We see every living being as a sacred part of God, and we feel compassion. And Haridasa Thakur, he was there. He was chanting 300,000 names of Krishna every day. And because he was so connected, he had so much compassion for others. When they were beating him, he was taking shelter of the divine sound of God's name. Golokera Premadana Harinam Sankirtana. That God has descended in his names. And there are many names of God in many religions. And in each of these names, if we take shelter, we can actually experience the direct presence of God, of Krishna, in the names of Sri Radha. So Haridas was in that state. And after 22 marketplaces, they said to Haridas that we are exhausted, we're executioners. We were beating you, we were insulting you, we were dragging you from place to place, and yet you were looking at us as if you felt sorry for us. Now we're going to be killed because we didn't kill you. So Haridas smiled. He said, oh, if my life is a disturbance, then just see what I do. And he sat in a lotus yoga posture and chanted the name of God, and all symptoms of life disappeared. And they brought him to the king, and they said, what should we do with him? And they said, just throw him in the river Ganges. So they threw his body in the Ganges. He had no heartbeat, no pulse, no breath. And he just floated underwater for some time, and then he came back to consciousness. He came back to life. He was in a state of samadhi. And he came out of the Ganges, and for most of us, we would probably go hiding somewhere. But what he did is he went right back to the king. And the priests that sentenced him to death, he went right back to them to forgive them. Of course, in the Christian Bible, Jesus, he was forgiving. He was forgiving the very people who were persecuting him. So this is so much the nature of an enlightened person, to feel this type of compassion. And Haridas, he had everything that he could be complaining about in life because he was so abused and misused and disrespected. But because he had such a deep spiritual connection by chanting God's names, by taking shelter, he was giving and forgive. His life was forgiving. And when he was very old, he wasn't able to really serve the way he loved to serve. And he wasn't afraid of death. He wasn't afraid of anything. Abhaya Charana Ravindare, because he was just seeing Krishna. He was just seeing God in his heart and in his life and in everyone's heart. And Lord Chaitanya's assistant, Govinda, came to his place. It was near the Jagannath temple in Puri, with a special gift of prasad that Lord Chaitanya had sent. Prasad is spiritual food. And Haridas was laying down, and he was very, very weak. He said, actually, why should I eat? Because I am not feeling well. I haven't been able to complete my chanting of God's names. But at the same time, the gift of God's grace has come to me. How can I refuse it? So he offered his respects and took a little morsel. And when the news came to Lord Chaitanya came to Haridas's house and asked, how is your health? And Haridas, it's a very long and beautiful and sweet story of loving exchange, but I'm going to be very brief. Haridas basically said, it's my time. And my desire is I could leave this world holding your feet on my heart, with my eyes like bumblebees gazing upon your beautiful lotus face and chanting your holy names. That he said, this is my prayer. So Lord Chaitanya, he said to Haridas that how could you leave? Don't you know how dear you are to me and to everyone, how painful it will be to all of us if you leave us? Haridas replied that actually I'm like a little insect. In the entire creation, if one single ant happens to die, what is the loss to the universe? Please fulfill my wish. It was his genuine humility. The next day, Lord Chaitanya came with his closest associates. And when they entered Haridas's courtyard, Haridas greeted them. And Lord Chaitanya began by glorifying his devotee, glorifying Haridas with so much love, with so much affection, with so much appreciation and gratitude. He was speaking his appreciation for Haridas as if he had 5 mouths. And everybody was in rapt attention. This is the love that they had for each other. And then the Lord had everybody having kirtan, the divine chanting of the holy names of the Lord. And as they were chanting, Haridas placed Lord Chaitanya's feet on his heart and gazed at the moon-like face of Lord Gauranga and repeatedly chanted, Shri Krishna, Shri Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. And then Haridas offered his respect, his honor, his love to all the assembled people, all the devotees that were there. And with tears streaming from his eyes, tears of love and gratitude, he gave up his life. It was completely natural. His soul left his body. And Lord Chaitanya, out of love for Haridas, out of intense feelings of separation from the company of Haridas, which was so beautiful through the medium of his body, Lord Chaitanya lifted his body and danced, ecstatically danced with it as everybody was chanting God's names. It was an expression of such profound ecstatic love. And then Swarup Damodar Goswami reminded Lord Chaitanya of the rituals that were required for the last rites. And they made a beautiful carrier out of just natural bamboo for Haridas. And they brought his body in a procession to the sea. In that procession, Lord Chaitanya was dancing and crying in the ecstasy of love and separation from his devotee. And according to the customs of in that part of the world, especially at that time, Lord Chaitanya personally bathed Haridas's body in the sea. And personally, along with the other saints, they dug the hole in the ground with their hands, and then Lord Sri Chaitanya and his personal devotees, the great Vaishnavas, they put the sand on Haridas's body and made a nice little structure on top and circumambulated. In this way, Lord Chaitanya, he showed his love for this person who he loved so dearly in being there for him in every way. And Lord Chaitanya proclaimed, and this is still 500 years ago, considered sacred. Lord Chaitanya said, anyone for all time to come who bathes in the sea here will be specially purified, because this place is now a holy place of pilgrimage, because it has bathed the body of Haridasa Thakur. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself. He's the supreme God who has appeared on earth. He never said this is a holy place because I bathed here. He said this is a holy place because the body of Haridas was bathed here. Such appreciation. And then Sri Chaitanya, in order to commemorate this ceremony of the passing of Haridas, he went from shop to shop in the town of Puri and begged for food, for prasad. He said, I want to have a feast to honor the passing of Haridas. And everyone was bringing so much. And he was begging. He was begging, shop to shop, house to house, to show his appreciation for his devotee. And eventually, there was a wonderful feast, and Lord Chaitanya wanted to serve himself, but his associates said, you kindly, nobody will have anything until you do, so you sit and we will. And after this big, wonderful feast, Lord Chaitanya personally put a garland on everybody and put sandalwood pulp on everybody as a way of honoring Haridas. And then he proclaimed a benediction. The benediction that anyone who has in any way participated in this pastime of Haridasa Thakur's passing will be blessed by Krishna. Anyone who was there for the kirtan, anyone who put the sand on his body or bathed him in the sea, anyone who has taken this prasad, anyone who has, anyone who even hears this story for all time to come will be very specially blessed by Krishna. And then Lord Chaitanya called out, everybody repeat after me. Jaya Jaya Haridas. Jaya Jaya Haridas. All glories to Haridas. So the whole world is glorifying God, but God is glorifying those who love him. And the author of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, who tells this story, he explains that the message that is so important for us to embrace is how the Lord loves his devotees and how the devotees love the Lord and how the community loves each other and is there for each other. To think that because we're eternal souls and we're spiritual, then that's an indication that we should neglect people's physical or emotional health is a very short-sighted and immature understanding. Spirituality, bhakti, Krishna consciousness, whatever we may call it, religion, it's holistic. Our beloved Guru Srila Prabhupada, every letter he wrote, he would end it, I hope this letter meets you in the best of health. And obviously that meant physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Physically, the body is Krishna's property. I'll give another example from that same book of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. At one time, Sanatana Goswami was extremely sick, and he was just thinking, this body is useless. And he was just thinking, let it go. And Lord Chaitanya said, you have no right. This body belongs to God. You have no right to destroy or misuse or neglect another person's property. So this body is God's vehicle entrusted in our care. Our children, our family, are God's children entrusted in our care. Our community are God's children entrusted in our care. So to take the best possible, but the difference between spiritual care for the body and for our own body and materialistic care for the body is how we use our body. If we're using our body as an instrument of God's compassion for spiritual purpose, then taking care of our health is bhakti. It's devotional service. It's facilitating God's will in this world through ourselves. And to honor and respect, because the body is the medium by which we communicate with each other. To respect and to honor and to help each other physically and to give honor and respect to people emotionally, to appreciate people, to encourage people, to uplift people. Because spirituality very much is practiced through the medium of the body and the mind. And the idea of yoga is that we harmonize the body with the mind and with the soul and with God and with all living beings and with the environment, with the nature around us. That's holistic, harmonious yoga. And that's what Krishna consciousness, that's what bhakti, that's what religion is really for. It's so very important. The story of Lord Chaitanya and Haridas gives us a very deep perspective of how we are meant to treat each other in life and in every stage of life. You know, in the Vedic literatures, there's compassion for the embryo in the womb through various types of ceremonies and various ways that the mother and the community help that little baby in the womb of the mother to become enlightened and healthy, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then there are so many ways, little babies and little children. There's in Kula Pradeep, you know, that you are expert at these samskaras. There's different transitional stages of life where physically, emotionally, and spiritually there's blessings, there's compassion, and one of those samskaras, one of those transitions is old age. You know, when Srila Prabhupada was very, you know, in his last stage of life, the devotees were doing everything for his body, and Prabhupada was doing everything for ours. He was concerned with what we eat, and he was concerned with every aspect that we would be happy, because spirituality really should make us happy in life and make us happy in death. And this beautiful story of Haridas and Lord Chaitanya is important, because Lord Chaitanya he's God, but he's in the role of a devotee. In this story, he's also teaching us how we should all treat each other.
Thank you, Maharaj. I think there are many people here in either healthcare or spiritual care, and that was a very inspiring, it's kind of rejuvenating, looking at spiritual care again. It's like a sadhana. It's putting us in the right place, the right way to see the work that we do. And for the people who are interested in spiritual care, it's also very encouraging and something that we could all do, as you tied into the idea of community. And we all have family who are either sick or getting older, or just to give care. Anybody, even if somebody's healthy, you know, definitely when someone's healthy. So I thank you for sharing that pastime in the way that you did. It was very moving, and I think I deeply appreciate it. I think everybody did. Dina Bandhu-ji, I think he has. We have some questions from the audience. If there's time, I think there is time.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Maharaj. illustrated so much with that telling of this beautiful pastime. It's so much to take with us. So just wanted to share a few questions. We have some wonderful, sincere questions from those who are with us tonight. So Brajbhumi Prabhu, he asked, many of our questions actually tonight, Maharaj, had to do with our current pandemic situation. I think it's just something that's weighing on so many of us. But Brajbhumi Prabhu, he said, currently due to the coronavirus, and also Brajbhumi Prabhu is in the medical profession, it's worth mentioning, family members and other visitors may not always be allowed to visit with their loved ones. And so he asks, what's the best way to be there for these individuals who are suffering and unable to have friends or family physically present? And then on the other hand, being there for someone who is not able to be with loved ones, the reverse of that situation. And along these same lines, Amritananda Prabhu asked about his mother-in-law, who is currently dealing with terminal cancer and has only a few months to live. And how can we uplift people, whether it's in person or from a distance? How can we deal with these limitations?
If when we really care, that's important, that we really need to care. Caring is not just a ritual. Caring is a state of the heart and the mind. And very much spiritual practice is for the purpose of actually developing real compassion, where we really do care. And if we care, if we have this karuna, this compassion, then we'll do everything we can. But if there's a limitation of what we can do, then our prayers, our pujas, our chanting, when we're offering our spiritual practice in a prayerful way for the well-being of another, when we're chanting God's name together for the well-being of another, there really is not any geographical limitation to the benefits, because spirituality is beyond geographical limitations, even beyond time. If we're praying for someone around the world, just on a material level, we have this virtual Zoom conference. We're all together, and some people who are on this conference may be 10,000 miles away. I see quite a few people from New York and Princeton and Europe and India. And if just through material engineering we could be communicating like we are now, then what to speak when we're actually on a spiritual level connecting to the Lord within our hearts? We're connected. If we're chanting, if we're praying for someone, if they're in the next room, if they're in the same room, or if they're 10,000 miles away, we should understand and we should know that that energy is going to them. And as far as possible, if we can physically be with them, then we should. But if that's not possible, they are not bereft of everything that we can do for them, nor are we bereft of the opportunity to serve them. That is a spiritual principle. Prayer, kirtan, in a spirit of love and shelter and compassion, is far more effectively communicative than internet. And we're all together now through internet, so how we could all be together through the medium of bhakti or devotion.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Maharaj. So we have a question from Allegra. She says, sometimes we have friends, family, community members who seem to be trapped in harmful patterns and sometimes hurting themselves or others. It can be very painful to see this pain and not be able to do anything about it. Does Bhakti practice offer us any insights into how we can support these members of our community?
His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj used to say, even when he was on his deathbed, or let's say his launching pad to the spiritual world, he was laying there and he only had days more to live in his physical body, and he would smile and he would say, I have been blessed by the best. And I was thinking, we have all been blessed by the best. It's just a matter of opening our hearts to receive that blessing, but still we have to do the rest. We have to try the best we can. Being spiritual doesn't mean to just leave it to God. It means to be the best we could be and do the best we can do, and in a mood of taking shelter and leaving the rest to God. So, whatever we can do with our intelligence, that where we can actually help such people that are having such difficult times or are antagonistic or whatever, we try to do the best we can. We try to have as much spiritual connection and as much spiritual intelligence we try to develop so we can help such people. But if we're not able to directly help them with our words or physically, then being a well-wisher in our hearts, through our prayers, through our goodness, opening ourselves to be available. These are ways that we could show our love and our compassion to the capacity that we are able to do. There are so many situations in this world that appear to be out of our control. They may be the conditions of loved ones. They may be the environment with the climate changing, and they may be with political parties. There's so many things in this world within our own families or on a broader level of national and international that seem beyond our control. But there is something that is within our control. We could try to be the best we can be and be a well-wisher through our prayer, through our sadhana, and through doing what we can do to be an example.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. I feel like this answer that you just gave addressed so many questions that had come up here in our chat. And this principle of being a well-wisher and always offering our own spiritual practice for the benefit of others. And there's one question that came from Vinit Venkatabhatta Prabhu. He was asking, this is very relevant for those of us who are actively engaged in spiritual care work in hospital environments, especially. He said, how might we approach being instruments of spiritual care for those who may not have God or theism as part of their spirituality? On one hand, we want to be authentic to our own faith and offer what we can. But on the other hand, we want to be sensitive to those who do not have those particular beliefs. So how can we navigate that? How can we offer spiritual care to those who do not necessarily connect with spirituality themselves?
If we strive to go deep into our own spirituality, then Tesham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam Tatami Buddha Yogam Tam Yena Mamopayantate. Then we're given an intelligence of how to deal with particular situations. Let us take an example of Srila Prabhupada, because he's my guru and he's the inspiration of my life, the greatest inspiration. Whoever he was with, he was giving the best he had. And some people rejected, and some people accepted, and some people rejected, but because he was just so compassionate and so kind, they ended up accepting. So our role is not so much to judge people. Our role is to serve people. To serve by giving the best we can give, with the best intelligence. And that means, to be sensitive to whether a person, whether we could give them a drop or a bucket of grace. We're just there to try to be the best we could be for everyone. To be an instrument of Krishna, of God's grace to everyone. And there's a beautiful story in Chaitanya Bhagavat where Nityananda Prabhu, he was with some people who were very, very atheistic. And he kicked one of them. And our acharyas explained the reason he did that is because, not because he was angry with them, but because if he kicked them, then God would take it really seriously that, God, if my devotee has done this, I have to give my special mercy to this person. So of course we can't imitate that. But the principle is that if we really care about somebody, if we're really praying to somebody, then we can know for sure that God's grace is going to be there for them.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you. We're just so grateful to you for being here with us. And there are so many questions. Please forgive us that we're not able to address all of these questions. But Maharaj, in your way, by sharing so fully and so thoughtfully, and you touched upon all of these questions. I'm actually looking through the questions, and I see that in some way or another they have all been addressed. And these are deep topics of spiritual care, and we just pray that we can carry this with us, what you shared tonight, as we try to offer spiritual care within our communities and according to our own calling. So we just wanted to thank you all from our hearts for being here with us this evening. And we want to also just welcome you all to please join us in spirit. This is something that is going to be happening every week, every Wednesday. We have a gathering like this. Of course, tonight we had the extremely immense joy of being with Radhanath Swami Maharaj. But every Wednesday night, we do want to gather and have discussions on these topics, matters of the heart, matters of spiritual care. And they begin at this very same time, 7 o'clock. So if you go to the Bhakti Center, Doyle Garanga just very kindly sent the link in the chat box. We would just love to have you with us. And we're also planning our virtual office hours, which will be for 1 hour prior to our group gathering from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And that can be done by appointment. You can reach out to us in spirit bhakticenter.org. And through that email, you can contact us and we can make a time for individual meetings as well. So it's our sincere hope and prayer to serve you and to hear from you all. And thank you so much. I'd like to turn it over to Barbara just to say good night to everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. We send you so much love and blessings. And it was such an honor, Radhanath Swami, for you to come and to be with us tonight. We're extremely grateful. Your words were so uplifting and inspiring to me, and I know to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. You are doing so much for so many. And I would like to say one thing, that just in the last few days, 2 people very dear to me have passed away from COVID-19. One is Brahmananda Puri Prabhu, who actually, at the time of the communist regime, he had a printing press in his basement, underground, and he was printing Prabhupada's books in the Russian language, the Bhagavad Gita. And he was the #1 person on the KGB's list to try to catch as far as the Krishna consciousness. And somehow or other, he risked his life, and he's just a wonderful friend. And he just passed away in the last couple days. And Janavi Jivana Devi, you know, Shruti Ram Prabhu, who lives in Woodstock, wonderful kirtan devotee. He just passed away today. And of course, you know, Krishna Nandini Devi and Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj and Nitai Chaitanya Maharaj and so many others have left for various reasons. Let us just offer our sincere, heartfelt gratitude and prayers for these very, very special personalities. Hare Krishna, and thank you.